Hi, welcome to this first video in getting to know your Crave synthesizer. We're going to start with the very basics in this video, kind of the minimum that you need to get going with this instrument, and then talk about the first section here, the oscillator section. So this will be a pretty basic video, so if you're already familiar with how the instrument works and all that, this is probably not the one for you. Okay, one of the nice things about the Crave, as opposed to some other analog synths, is that it has a built-in keyboard, which means with very minimal amount of stuff you can get going. The only thing I have plugged in right now is the power, and the only other thing that we're actually going to need is a way to get the sound out of it. So what I'm going to be using is a 3.5 millimeter to a 1/4 inch jack. This end is going to go into the VCA line, and the other end is going to go into my mixer. What you can also do is you can take a pair of headphones and plug them into this jack, and then you'll be done. I do want to say though, make sure you turn your volume to 0 before you start. You will be very surprised if you get a loud pop in your ears. All right, so VCA line, other end goes into the mixer. That is all we have to do. We do have MIDI jacks here, and we can connect a MIDI keyboard, but we'll talk about doing that in the next video. All right, so let's turn it on. Get a little light show, and there we go. Down to 0. Here we go. I just play a note on my keyboard. I'm not hearing anything because I was smart and I turned down my sound. So if I just hold down a pitch here and turn this up. Sorry. We'll set it about there. All right, so it's a clicky keyboard. So if you're trying to play smooth melodies and things, this isn't going to be the option for you. But again, we're going with bare minimum today. This is all we need. I want to make sure we set our synthesizer to kind of a starting state. If you're used to a digital synth, maybe you have an init patch. This, of course, has no patch memory, besides the fact that the knobs and dials stay where they were when you turn it off. It does remember patterns, but that's it. All right, so we're going to set our frequency knob to about in the middle, pulse width in the middle, oscillator mod all the way down, mix knob all the way to the left, cutoff all the way up, resonance all the way down, VCF mod all the way to the left. Volume is where we set it. Attack at 0, decay at 0, sustain all the way up, LFO rate all the way down, glide at 0, VC mix at 0. I've got my thing set to octave 4 here. As we get down, it's hard to distinguish pitch at that low volume, or that low of a pitch. So 4th octave is where your instrument will default to. For the toggle switches, I have, let's go with sawtooth wave, LFO, frequency, low, envelope, positive, envelope, on, and triangle. And if those words don't make sense yet, we'll be getting to all of them. All right, let's start with the frequency knob. That's this one right here. Also, unlike a digital synthesizer, you can change the frequency of the note you're playing by just turning this. Maybe if you have a coarse tuning knob or a fine tuning knob on your other instruments, that would be something similar. The difference here is that nothing tells you when you're actually at 0 in tune. So let's say I play an F here. I can lower this down as far as I want to go. It goes down about an octave plus a major second. Or it goes up about the same distance. So there's nothing that makes the instrument play in tune. So what we need to do is, just like if we were playing the cello or the bassoon or something, we need to tune our instrument. Now you could do this by playing an external sound source and then turning this knob so that the pitches that you are hearing match with one another, or you can use a little electronic tuner like this one. And that's what we're going to do right here. So I'm going to take the output of my instrument here, and I'm going to send it into the input of the tuner. And then when I play a note, it'll tell me if the note is sharp or flat. I'm going to use a separate cable to do this, but you could just take the end of your VCA line and do this. If you're using headphones, I'd suggest you use the having an external sound source and matching it method. Alright, so I'll just plug that into there to the input, hold a note, and you can see that it's pretty sharp. So I just turn this a little bit. It's big range, so I don't have to do much. Okay, go down here, C's in tune, E flat, there it is, B flat. Now because this is an analog synthesizer, chances are the longer that it's turned on, the pitch will stabilize. So Behringer in the manual suggests giving it about 15 minutes. So if you plan on playing with other instruments and you're worried about playing in tune with them, give the instrument about 15 minutes to warm up before you start playing with them. And then recheck your tuning. All right. So now we're playing in tune at A440. Now before we continue through this section, I just want to point out, you see these toggle knobs and toggle switches, and they're directly underneath knobs. That doesn't mean that they are directly related. This was one of my first misconceptions when I came across this instrument, was that, oh, well, this toggle must affect this knob. Actually, that is not always the case. In some cases, it is, like here you have low pass filter, high pass filter attached to the cutoff frequency. But in this one, mod destination has nothing to do with the oscillator mix knob. So just so you don't think that they must work together in tandem all the time. All right, so we have 3 internal sound sources. Well, we have 2 internal sources. We have 3 different sounds that we can start with on the Crave. And we can start right here with this shape toggle. It says 3340 VCO. That's just the model of oscillator built into this instrument. It's the same one in the Neutron. It's the same one in the MS-1. So we have 2 wave shapes. We have the sawtooth wave, and then we have a square wave. Okay, so different sounds there. And then we also have a noise generator. And to hear that, we use our oscillator mix knob. So if turned all the way to the left, we're hearing the sound of the oscillator. If I turn that all the way to the right, you see it says noise. And it doesn't matter which key I push, that's always just white noise. If I set this to about halfway, you'll hear oscillator and noise. You can also use this knob to get sounds from an external sound source that you would plug into the external audio jack here. We will not be talking about that today. So we're going to stay all the way to the left, hearing only the oscillator for now. Now, the next knob to talk about is pulse width. Now, the pulse width knob only does anything if you have the square wave selected. If you have sawtooth, it doesn't do anything. Pulse width is purely a function of the pulse wave, or the square wave. So if I hold this here, you can see how the character of the wave changes. What happens is that square shape, which is perfectly up and then perfectly down, it gets to where one side is very narrow and the other side is very long. And at least this nasal sound. So as you pass through, when you get back to the pure square, then you start to hear those overtones again. So now we've already seen that there's 2 knobs here that can change the sound of what's coming out of our instrument. One is the pitch knob, where we can change the frequency, and one is pulse width, where we can change the sound of the square wave. Now, I could sit here and go like this. That would be very tedious. I'd leave my hand busy the whole time. So what we need to do is we want to modulate those sounds using another part of the instrument. So we're just going to use the LFO for now. We can talk more about this later. But for now, we just have our LFO rate set to 0. You can see that this light is flashing very slowly. And that's kind of the speed at which this wave is moving up and down. If I turn it, it'll move faster and faster. Okay. And I have the shape here set to triangle. If I set it to square, it becomes an on-off sort of blink. You can see how it kind of fades in and out. Here it just turns on and off. So we'll get a different sound, whichever shape we use. More on that later. So let's say that I want to change the pulse width using the LFO. So mod source is our first toggle we're going to talk about. I can use the envelope, but I'm not going to use that for an oscillator modulation. We're going to leave this switch on LFO. So the LFO is going to be the source of the modulation. And then where I want that modulation to go, that's the destination. And I can send it to the pulse width. Now if I hold a pitch, well, you can't hear anything. What's going on? That's because there's one knob left for us to talk about, and that is the oscillator mod. This determines how much change it can make. So if I turn this up, well, let's say halfway, and now I turn this on, you can hear that pulse width changing. It would be very similar to if I went, if I turn that knob really slowly. If I turn this up faster, pulse width changes faster. If I turn this all the way up and allow it to do the maximum amount of change, and then I turn the speed of the LFO all the way up, turning modulation sources and amount knobs all the way up usually lead to crazy and fun results. Set it back to 0, no modulation. Now the other thing I can do is I can modulate the pitch. So if I change my destination to frequency, now if I hold down the LFO, I will hear the pitch moving up and down instead of the pulse width. It's going really slowly. So as I increase the amount that I let it modulate the sound, the distance between the two pitches gets wider and wider. So I can go really slowly, but turn it all the way up, and you're going to hear the entire range of this oscillator. And like I said before, if you turn everything up, fun things start to happen. So there is our oscillator modulation section. From here, we would move on to using our filters, using our envelopes. and then talking a little bit more about what we can do with the LFO, and then of course, how do we use the patch bay at the top. But for this first video, that's a good place to stop. Next time we'll be talking about using a MIDI keyboard, so I'm not having to press these very clicky keys all the time, and we'll be talking about the filters. All right, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment sections below, and I'll see you in the next one.